the first word actually to Pladerack. I'm not sure that everybody on Zoom could actually hear it properly, but it is.
It was super strange. Yeah, I was already freaking out what's happening.
Yeah, it's a sound recording of Pladerack, basically, with this sort of very simple sound recorders that artists who've been working with different plants and also now algae have been working with us. And I wanted to start with giving a little bit of space for Pladerack to speak, because Pladerack was there on this island, on this region, before the islands were there. And so they kind of arrived when the Baltic Sea was still forming. When it wasn't Baltic Sea, it was Littorina Sea, and it was a lot saltier than it is today. And so kind of Pladerack is one of our ancestors in the Baltic Sea that keeps on hanging on with the kind of climate change impacts, trying to hang on there in this very low salinity waters today. And so this is very briefly me. There I am, very focused on Pladerack actually, while an artist is happily floating away in the background. That happens sometimes when you look very close, you kind of don't notice what's happening around you. So I've been working with CAA as a co-founder for a while. We started about 20 years ago. So today we're working specifically with an archipelago research institute of Turku University on this island that I introduced to you. But I'm also affiliated with this new Center for Sustainable Ocean Science, SOS, at Åbo Akademi University. And with this residency within TIDAL ArtS, our focus will be on really kind of opening up contacts for the artists to work not only with the one university or this one island and the research station there, but also with the Center for Sustainable Ocean Science, and also Aalto University and Helsinki University in Helsinki. So really depending on what is the focus of the artist's work, we can find those sort of right researchers, because the different institutions are also sort of specialized with different questions in different areas of research within the Baltic Sea. And so we started 20 years ago with CAA, planning the project that became a huge project. For 2011, when Turku was the European Capital of Culture. And so this started as a kind of a project that grew into commissions of 25 new artworks around the archipelago. It was a completely insane thing to do with an archipelago of thousands of islands. But we're kind of on that road still. And so CAA's the starting sort of mission was to focus on ecological issues, but always in connection to other societal questions. So rather than kind of think of sustainability or ecological sustainability as its own area, to always kind of try to kind of look at that intersectionally. And so we've been working with, for example, at this 2011, we worked with Gediminas and Nomeda Urbanas on a project where they looked at a lot of military infrastructure that the archipelago is full of, that was being demilitarized at the time. Now it's been all remilitarized, as you know. And so these questions of geopolitics and these geopolitical tensions, how they entangle with ecology, have been really crucial from the start. We worked with artists Arja Renel, for example, who worked with local food producers, working with the kind of conservation of island meadows, with these sort of summer workers. This summer worker has ended up in the field in the wintertime, though. Usually they graze in the summer months on the islands. And also fishermen and local restaurants to really think of how do we kind of, those sort of sustainable impacts of our everyday choices, and also development tourism, for example, in relation to the food cultures. Brax Media Collective made a work called More Salt in Your Tears that came from the kind of realization that this doesn't feel like a sea, they said in their first visit, swimming in the sea and saying that this is not salty enough. And so we're still on this sort of journey of really kind of understanding the importance of salt and salinity. In the Baltic Sea is really a kind of large river estuary rather than a sea. It has a kind of massive amount of Northern Europe rivers run into the Baltic Sea, and now with the kind of with the increase in rainfall, the salinity is going down gradually, which might be then met by the rising global sea levels. So there's this sort of, all the species like bladderwrack are really finely adapted to very specific kind of brackish water that also changes across the Baltic Sea as a body of water. So the kind of southern Baltic Sea is a lot more salty than the further north, where it's nearly like fresh water. And so those kind of even slight changes in the salinity are having a massive impact on the kind of local species. So it's a very fragile ecosystem that is undergoing massive changes. Temperature changes have gone up about 2 degrees already since the 60s, when some of this time series began. And this RAX Media Collective's work came from also the realization of finding out that actually the archipelago, Turku archipelago, the salinity is more or less the same, very close to the human body. So our tears, our bodily fluids, are actually, our body of water has the same salinity as the kind of Baltic Sea around there. Since 2016, we realized maybe thousands of islands was not such a sustainable thing to kind of focus on. We really focused on working on one island with the Archipelago Research Institute. These are kind of time capsules where they're kind of doing tests on how different bladderwrack from different parts of the Baltic Sea can adapt to changing salinity conditions. They've worked with long-term time series, so they've been taking kind of key measurements since the 60s, and it's really kind of showing now how climate change is having a very complex impact on the local ecology. And why it's an interesting island also for us is because it's an island of 400 years of institutions. So it was established as a hospital island in early 1600s by the then Swedish king. Finland was part of Sweden. And it was a leprosy colony. And that then also became a kind of more generic hospice, and eventually the first mental hospital in Finland. And before it was closed in 1962, it was a mental hospital for women only for the last few decades. And it closed and then turned into a research institute, ecological research institute. So we're really interested in how to kind of, on this very particular island, it's very difficult coming from the arts and humanities to think of ecology and ecological changes as distinct from societal kind of institutional sort of structures of knowledge production and these sort of institutions and legacies that we also in the arts and sciences obviously carry with us. It's also a kind of a island where the cows are there. They were there in 2011 when Ari was working with them, and they're still there in the summer months. So it's a nature reserve where there's also kind of quite a strong presence of nature conservation interventions. So to kind of think of what does conservation, what does repair mean in kind of on an island where there's 400 years of very heavy-handed impact of human impacts. So it's a very, very kind of dense place. And Lotta Petronella is an artist and filmmaker who I've worked really closely for these 20 years. She's a co-founder of CAA. And her film, Shelo, Island of Souls, gives you a kind of really interesting insight into the whole history of the island. And this has been on Netflix in Europe, at least, recently. So you might still be able to find it online. And so since 2017, we've had funding to actually bring artists to the island. And our focus has really been on kind of thinking, not just to kind of research the ecological transformations, but to actually really think of how are we implicated in all of this? How are our methods, practices, structures within which we work, our ways of producing knowledge? How is that entangled? And how do we also maybe need to change? So we're not simply just part of the solution, but we are also part of the problem. And so the questions of landing, how do you land somewhere like this with such a dense, such a complex history, and also those kind of every step has an impact. So that has really been a kind of, our residencies have, a lot of the residencies have started with kind of intensive collective retreats where we've actually really thought with the island to really think of how do we work with these questions today? How do we come as artists to work with scientists who've got 60 years of data, who work cross-generationally and understanding the complexities of this place? and sort of how do we develop these collaborations? What does it mean in practice? And so where we've kind of landed with is this idea of site sensitivity, rather than thinking of site specificity, to actually think of what does it mean to become site sensitive, to become sensitized maybe also with the place, and how working with a very particular site, how that becomes kind of starts demanding things of you. Demands changes maybe of your practice. It's kind of how does the site affect you? And like how do we give that kind of space for these complex questions arising to actually really drive the work, rather than us coming with a predetermined project. And so this has also implied that we move kind of thinking of different scales. Here, when you zoom out with Google Earth, you kind of lose the kind of specificities, as you can see. The Google Earth doesn't recognize the shallow, narrow water passages between islands. We've been zooming in, of course, looking at, what is there in the water, what is there in the drop of water that seems kind of empty of nothing, and how it turns into a kind of into a rich kind of ecosystem under a microscope of phytoplankton that produce half the oxygen that we breathe, for example. We've been thinking of timescales because of the Baltic Sea is a very young sea of about 10,000 years, so it's still in formation. So this sort of this kind of geological, ecological change is sort of now kind of also entangles with climate change and these anthropocenic, very kind of fast changes that are happening. The land is rising. So in 400 years of institutions, the land on the island has risen 2 meters. It's half a meter in 100 years. So it's a considerable presence of change constantly. The sea currents remind us constantly that we are actually connected to all the other bodies of water. And so what we've done and what we're kind of, our work focuses on a lot has been on kind of really thinking through fieldwork. And I found fieldwork as really important for our work together with the scientists for 2 things. One is that sort of this necessity to kind of somehow retreat from this constant state of emergency and sense of urgency of having to produce and act fast. That the kind of actually working with the site, you have to go with those different temporalities of the ecosystem, for example. That you have to think of the seasons, work across those sort of different cycles. But also fieldwork is something where artists and scientists can really meet each other and kind of, it can be a very fruitful base for collaboration, because we start from actually understanding not just the knowledge, but actually methods. And that is something kind of that can really, that we found a lot of commonalities between arts and field scientists at least. And we've been thinking about methods and tools, how they change. So they've changed from this in the early 60s, the sampling device, to this. What does it mean when our methods and tools change? How do we know what we know? And how the methods and tools are affecting that? Thinking of there's a lot of shared, how do we make sense of this sort of different phenomena that we're studying? Sometimes we've had some helpers in the lab. The marine biologists have taught us very practically of this is how we teach our students. So now we teach you the same way. This is what we do. So this very hands-on engagement with the ecology that we're working with. Thinking of how do we make sense of what we see? How do we try to make sense of what's below the surface of the sea that is very impenetrable to us in many ways with different kinds of technologies, and what those technologies bring with them in terms of kind of complex different legacies that we also have to deal with. And artists and scientists have spent a lot of time in the field or on the meadows, like here, artists and scientists looking at the same thing, or here researching the meadow ecosystem changes. And what we've also kind of focused on is not only sharing the outcomes, but actually sharing the process and inviting different communities and colleagues and public to actually do what we do, which is actually sharing methods and engaging, doing field work together. We've looked at the meadow ecosystems. We've looked at, this is a kind of herring kind of workshop. There's another herring day because they've done 40 years of herring research at the Research Institute. And so this kind of quite hands-on ways of working together and opening that process up has been very productive, I feel. There has been exhibitions and artists have produced work. This is, for example, work by metallurgy, Helena Hunter and Mark Peter Wright, who are really interested in the embodied knowledge of the scientists and how the scientists gather through fieldwork a lot of this kind of tacit knowledge that is not really articulated in the kind of, and can't be articulated in many ways within the scientific framework. But the kind of artists, we've really noticed that there's a lot now when the kind of methodologies and tools change, how there's a lot of knowledge that is being potentially lost when actually the scientists are not able to spend their whole career of kind of months and months a year on the field, embedded within the environment which they study. And so we've been thinking a lot and talking with different scientists from who do different kinds of field work on what is the kind of importance, what is there in field work, that is really crucial, and what changes, what is may be lost when technologies obviously allow us a lot of that kind of insight that we could not have otherwise. But if we don't actually have a chance to engage and be embedded within the environment that we work with and we study, what happens in that? This is from the New Bangaya is a project by Kalle Haman Band of Weeds, and the kind of bladder rack that you heard in the beginning was from this project. It's a project that has been really looking at transformations on the island through the kind of perspective of the plants, and how the human changes of the kind of human migrations and changes in agricultural sort of processes and so on have kind of how they can be read through, how the plants can be our guides to these transformations. How plants obviously travel by themselves, but also a lot of them have traveled with humans. And this is actually the sound of the bladder rack is part of this project that we did together. The scientists were hoping that some of this work coming out could be actually that we could bring that to the island in a way that with the growing number of tourists on the island, that they felt that there was no way for the visitors to actually really engage with the place itself. And this challenge of how do you actually draw attention to your environment, how do you share these sort of practices of attentiveness on the island itself, and so this has become a kind of a project that is ongoing now with Kalle and the scientist called Jasmin Inkinen, where they kind of continue working with the plants and thinking of how to kind of open this up. All these complexities, all these complex narratives the plants can tell us, how to open this up through the science and through the arts for the different visitors on the island and beyond. Lotta has continued working on the island also with plants, actually, looking at the different kinds of knowledges that are not archived or acknowledged, like the medical plants that obviously modern medicine is very new. On the island with 400 years of a history of institutions, there's been a lot of use of medicinal plants. There's no record of this in any way in the archives. So the soil itself on the island is the only archive that we have of what's being grown on the island, for example. And these medicinal herbs keep on popping up whenever the earth is stirred. And so this question of like what are those knowledges, that data that we don't have in our archives, in our knowledge bases, how we can tap into this through the arts and through the kind of collaboration and dialogue between artists and scientists has been a really crucial part of our thinking on different ways. This is work by Fraud, Audrey Sampson, and Francisco Gallardo, who've also been working. All of these artists have worked on the island and with us for quite a while now. They've kind of got stuck on the island. Like I feel that me and Lotta, we've got stuck. We'll never, we're voluntary kind of, voluntarily stuck on this island, unlike the people before. And so Audrey and Fran started working with the connection of Finnish forests to global maritime trade, and how tar from the kind of northeastern Finnish forest was shipped and sold as Stockholm tar in the Swedish Empire times to, for example, the British naval fleet, and because that was supposed to be the superior tar for wooden ships. And so the kind of these sort of histories of entanglement, of material entanglements globally from very remote peripheral places is something they've worked with. And now they've created with this old masts of an old museum ship that were being restored, and these old masts were being thrown away. I've actually created this sort of a structure that is a meeting place. It kind of provides infrastructure on the island for these sort of conversations across disciplines around these urgencies that we face today. And the herring windsock is part of the work, and whenever we have these sort of events and seminars and workshops and so on, we pull this herring windsock on the flagpole, and the kind of idea is to follow the herring, to remember to follow the herring. And so our latest is now we're kind of working to establish the speculative institute, or undisciplinary institute of art and ecology, to kind of coming from this understanding that actually transdisciplinarity is obviously necessary for us to actually address the issues that we face today. But also we are very disciplined by our disciplinary formation, and that applies to arts and sciences. Both. The artists are not any more undisciplinary than the art scientists are, but actually we've been through our training, we've been really kind of disciplined, and we have to be able to kind of break out of that and open up in order for us to really be able to kind of work across these disciplinary boundaries. And so whatever that will be, I'm hoping that the artist that comes to residency next year with us will also help us be part of this sort of formation of emergent undisciplinary institute in some way or another. And here you can find some more information on us. Thank you.